And he's looking at the pile of stones delivered there on his right, and on his left is his canvas where he's building something.
Hi, I'm Jess. Today we're opening up on ceremony for enthusiasts, iconoclasts, anarchists, and you. Rambling and unscripted is good. So I'm going to introduce you a bit more formally. So you're Toby Angel, which is obviously the best name ever. And you are what in relation to the sacred stones? What do you call yourself? CEO? I don't think you're going to call yourself that somehow. What do you call yourself?
No. I'm a co-founder, and I suppose
Yeah.
I'm the managing director because I kind of do everything.
So tell us what sacred stones is for the reader, for the listener, so that they have an idea of what we're talking about. It's absolutely the most exciting thing I've ever seen.
Essentially, we design, build, and administer community memorials which provide a safe storage for cremation ashes. And oh, look, there's one I made earlier. A barrow.
A little model behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A barrow, for those who don't know, is the structure, earth or stone covered in soil, that was used by our ancient ancestors about 5,000 years ago. And it was the building they used to venerate their dead. And as a practice, it was used for millennia, right up until the Saxon age. So what we do is we build these, we listen to an echo, and we build these structures, and people use them to store ashes, to host funerals, memorials, and critically other life-affirming events. And that could be theater or performance or conversation, tea and biscuits, or it could be education. So I describe it as a community memorial because it is entirely focused on providing a facility for the broader community.
I tend to have a focus on community as well with my work. I think that's really interesting. So also they're very beautiful is the other thing that people need to know. They're just so beautiful, and you want to go and visit Sacred Stones. Is it .co.uk?
It is.
I really urge you to have a look at the pictures because that will really set the scene, and we will put everything in the show notes anyway. We're going to come back to everything around what you do and the big passion. But my first question to you is, what is the best experience of a ceremony you've ever had?
It's not an easy question to answer, because the best could be how I perceive a family has responded to the venue, and I viewed their response and how satisfied they've been with their experience. And I think that must be, that's our entire focus. We merely facilitate. Me personally, it was either my aunt's, which was at a church in rural Essex about 3 months ago on a very hot summer's day. Remember those? Where Paddy died naturally. It was a blessing. She was elderly and, passed naturally. And we gathered in the church and didn't wait for Paddy to arrive, as you might. We were in there chatting, saying hello to old friends. There were lots of dogs in there. She was a dog person, which was mildly amusing. And then after a while, the organ struck up and Paddy arrived. And it was a really easy experience. There wasn't the formality that one may experience, which absolutely has its place. My two examples, and the second one I'll come to, are good experiences because it was a very natural ending. It wasn't a tragedy. It was clearly sad.
Yes.
It wasn't a tragic experience. The other one was Pat, my brother's mother-in-law. Pat died in the 90s in Romsey, and we went to the creme there, and she was in a cardboard coffin. She was a force of nature, my gosh. And the children and family and friends had put postcards and written all sorts of messages onto her coffin. So when Pat lay in her coffin on the catafalque at the end of the service in this rather stark, atypical, soulless building at the crematoria, everyone was invited behind the curtains. And if you're in the industry, you'll you'll understand my subtle humor with regard to
Yeah.
the curtains. Uh, and the curtains were not drawn, and everyone was invited, and everyone went up and they looked at Pat's coffin and they touched it and they walked around it. So Pat was absolutely there, which may sound a bit odd, but she was very present.
I don't find that odd, actually. I often say with my work that my job is to bring them back into the room one last time, almost so that you can say goodbye to them properly from who they have been, rather than perhaps the last few months of their life. So I really understand that. And it can, if you get it right, it really does feel like they're there in some sense.
I suppose I think you're absolutely right. It's words are really important in this ritual. And what we've learned, for example, is that we are not qualified to provide any form of counsel at all. But understandably, we are invited into intimate conversation readily by people who are in a vulnerable state. And we've learned to respectfully be quiet and not volunteer anything. And it's tough. It's really, really tough. And, people are searching for a peace of mind, a state of mind, which, whether they're aware of it or not, allows them to move on as something physical has taken place. I haven't really thought about it in that way before, but yeah, words are really important. So they're the two that strike me as, beyond the Queens and the Duke of Edinburgh's. I found them
Of course, yeah, of course.
utterly, utterly compelling. Probably the Duke of Edinburgh's more than anything, actually. I thought it was just extraordinary, and I've got my letter of wishes here that says, something like "Don't bugger about," and if you want to drink, drink. But actually, no, I want a big fanfare.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk, isn't there, particularly in the celebrant world, of um, how things should be. Like they should, and it's almost like an opposing orthodoxy that it has to be informal, or it has to be no horses, or it has to be no limo. And that really bugs me, because for the right family, then that's absolutely the right thing. So I get a bit fed up with that. So I love that you've mentioned those big formal state occasions and loved them, because they're also important.
Well, look, we're facilitators. We are not the arbiters of good, bad, indifferent. We're not the arbiters of
That's right.
a word I hate, cheap or expensive. It strikes me as facilitators, we're here to provide informed choice. What do you want?
Yeah.
In your neighborhood is a funeral director who I think rock, called Arca. And the reason why I think they rock is because outside their shop, there's a sandwich board that says, "You don't need a funeral director. You are the funeral director."
Oh, that's nice. I've not seen that. That's really good.
I think that's fantastic. When my father died, it was a very, very peaceful moment, which I was lucky enough to see. But thereafter, my brother, my sister, my mother, and a vicar gathered around the kitchen table to describe and discuss what we should be doing. And there's me thinking, right, okay, I'm kind of in the business, so I know. You are utterly discombobulated. You emotionally and mentally, you're completely disconnected. And I think this can be observed physically as from a biological perspective as much as anything. But in that process, you need handrails. You need something to hold you, and formality may well be a really useful way of helping get you through this process and start on a journey. I remember sitting down with a funeral director and discussing the coffins available, and noting that the most expensive coffin was £30,000. And one of the people in the meeting said, "Why on earth would anyone do that?" And I looked at that person. I said, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you or I
That's right.
think.
Absolutely.
It's got nothing to do with us
Absolutely. And
whatsoever."
that's right. And people say things like, "Oh, it's such a waste of money." No, you do not get to make decisions about the value of a thing for another person. For them, it's their last thing they can pay for.
And I think one has to be pragmatic. So embalming. Okay, so one absolutely needs to respect, I believe, that in certain cultures it is important to that group of people.
Mhm.
We have to respect that.
Yeah.
Me personally,
Yeah.
I know that putting formaldehyde in anyone or anything, i.e., the earth, is a complete no-no. You simply shouldn't do it, and you do not need to do it for any reason. But I equally understand that
Mhm.
in certain cultures, it's really important. Okay, fine. And one shouldn't impose within reason a belief or
Yeah, yeah,
thinking that
we are with
challenges.
of one accord.
Yeah,
Totally, totally. Give me an experience, is the worst experience, like the worst ceremony you've ever been to, or the worst experience at a ceremony that you've had?
well, again, I'll give you two for the price of one.
Excellent.
I'll start with a somber one and finish on something which I hope is taken as it is meant, lightheartedly. So the first one that comes to mind is a friend of ours called Liz died very suddenly about 5 years ago. She was a journalist. She was a journalist of the decade for a number of reasons. She's very, very well known in the industry. Anyway, she was godmother to my youngest. And at her ceremony, the thing that I found so striking was the crass and rather um, uh, formulaic language that was used by the celebrant. And it felt so desperately
Mhm.
impersonal. Oh, it was the generic terms used to describe the people, the process, to describe Liz, so on and so forth. And I felt sorry for the assembled. I felt very sorry for the celebrant actually, because I think she was probably doing her utmost. I mean, there was standing room only there. The good and the great were there. I mean, it was massive. It was such a big deal. But I just thought, oh, good heavens, we've compartmentalized Lizzie's 50 years into this 45-minute bullshit. And you're using language which is not really, it's just, I don't think, and of course, this is me talking about my personal experience, and I'm sure other people, so
Yeah,
full
that's the
disclosure,
whole point.
this is about me. It's not about anyone else.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I'm keen to say I do feel for the celebrant because I don't know how she felt the service went. I mean, logistically, it worked perfectly. Everyone ushered in, they sat down. There were more tears than Noah expected, and it was all on time and so on and so forth. But the language that was used was just insufficient to convey anything to
Mhm.
me. But that's perhaps a stylistic thing. So that was possibly the worst, I think.
It's
Uh,
interesting, a comment on that, because I find, again, there's all this, it's very kind of polarized opinions around funerals. So you have a lot of people say, oh, it was a church do, and therefore, and then fill in the blanks, as though you're going to suddenly say, oh, therefore it was bad, or the vicar was X. But the fact is, a lot of my friends are vicars, and they're phenomenal people, and they're amazing facilitators, and ceremonies don't always end up being very formal in churches. And celebrants are sometimes really boring, sometimes really gimmicky, and sometimes really trite. So it doesn't follow that necessarily your orthodoxy or your beliefs are reflected in the way that you work. So I think it's important to say that sometimes celebrants don't quite hit the note either. We're not good or bad. It's both and.
look, look, I was in the wrong job for 25 years. Right, I get it. I understand it. I think I do. And
Yeah.
we have people who are good wordsmiths, people who are good who are good performing, and some people who are not as inclined to do it. Celebrancy is a really, really tough role to perform for a number of reasons. To put it crudely, commercially, it does not work. The number of hours
Yeah.
that you would pour into
Mhm.
a client's work, it just doesn't
Yeah.
work. So you're doing it for
It's
very
not a business
different
model, is
reasons.
it?
No, not well, it is a business model, but one that fails on any sort of
It fails.
metric of
I
success.
love Oh my God, I love this conversation because I literally, the reason I was late was because I finally had contact with a funeral director where I was able to say my fee is higher than you are going to be used to. And you can either work with me, and I will explain why, and it's because I can't eat. Um, or you can just say, no, we can't work with you because your fee is too low. But that is what I have to charge in order for it to work. And she was amazing. She was really, really good about it. Sometimes you just have to, it's the elephant in the room. But you're right.
First and foremost, pat yourself on the back because you have
Thank you.
professional pride, you have conviction, and you're principled. Now,
Hmm.
to quote
And I want
Groucho
to be
Marx,
first, like someone has to do it.
yeah, quote Groucho Marx,
Go on.
if you don't like my principles, I'm sure I could find some that you do like. Um, but I
Yeah,
think
it's hard though.
it really is, and there's an exchange of money here for a professional service, and the monetary value should, in theory, qualify the level of service you're receiving. You're being invited into someone's home at their most vulnerable point in their life, one of them. And that requires a huge amount of interpersonal skills. It requires a significant amount of ability to observe and absorb and keep quiet. All those
I
things.
feel so emotional hearing this.
That's what it is. It's a brutish job. And unfortunately, my take, again, forgive me, I'm not an expert, is that the principal role of a funeral director is based around logistics,
Yeah,
collection,
undertaking the tasks.
collection, preparing, storing, paperwork, delivering. In that process, and funeral directors are fundamentally very, very good people because they deal with the living,
They are.
right?
That's right.
And it could be the case that because the monetary aspect of this, the grubby part, is really held by the funeral director. And I understand that they want to hold that. Some are imaginative, many are not, because they don't need to challenge their business model at all. Why would I need to think outside the
Mhm.
box? Sorry. Um,
Yeah.
you know, so I think your role is really, really tough. And I applaud you for doing that. There's Rosalind Kuhnhoven in North London. She and I've worked together. Great celebrant. I'm worth it.
Yeah,
I
she
mean,
has a
really,
great reputation, doesn't she?
yeah, she's worth it. I'm worth X amount. I am worth it. And I'm afraid if you
Hmm.
don't
Hmm.
value that, then I'm just not the right person for you. So we get asked all the
That's right.
time, can you recommend a funeral director? And we can, but we will only recommend funeral directors who we've had first-hand experience with and of. And my
Hmm.
answer to someone is, look, talk to them. This is a personal relationship. If you can find the right wavelength for you and your family, they're probably the people for you. If you don't find the right wavelength, they're probably not. You probably should talk to someone else. And I think that must apply to working with a settlement.
It's absolutely fundamental. Yeah, it really is. So it's just lovely to have that acknowledged, really, because I mean, I got to the point where I thought I'm getting vicarious trauma. Not that I knew what that was and worked for 10 years doing it, not knowing. But I then discovered about it, and I thought I need to be able to afford a therapist. I don't have any professional supervision. Celebrants, generally speaking, don't. And if you're a psychiatrist, and I tend, probably the hair, don't know, I tend to attract the tragic ones. So I get a lot of people who take their own lives, a lot of people in their early 20s, accidents, all that, that, um, addictions, things that, and I realized that that's not the same as Margaret, who is 96 and had a nice time and had a peaceful death. It's not the same. And it takes a lot more, if you're having to work with family dynamics and you're having to keep families apart and things like that.
Can we dwell on that? Because we've never met before. And I think we share
Yeah,
a
we should
wavelength
be
of some
saying that.
description. We
Yeah,
and my
yeah, for
sense
sure.
is that you dealing with the tragic ones is that how to put this, you know, visually and the way you talk, you personify life. You know, you have energy, you look energized, you clearly embrace life. And I suspect, is it the case that people respond to that and therefore they need that connection rather than someone who would be dour and dark and rather Victorian in their attitude? Maybe that's why, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that, I mean,
They're
I've
lovely
it's
things you're saying. Thank you.
well, I'm forgive me, I'm not here just to shower praise, but it's easy enough to do. The challenge, I think, for anyone in the industry is, you know, we're human creatures and human beings, and we do um, we do. It's very difficult not to absorb energy, and you know, decompression is really important. And I think for you and your in your profession, I think observing that, decompressing, and actually looking after yourself must be a real challenge.
It is because of the fee, like, because you can't, first of all, you can't afford it. And this, I would be really excited if I start to raise awareness around this for my fellow celebrants. You can't afford it. And also, you're having to work so hard because the fee is so low that you're exhausted and you're taking on too much. So you sometimes will hear from celebrants who are maybe doing 5 a day, 5 days a week. I've no idea how they do it because I'm someone that engages so fully that I can't, I'm in a coma the day afterwards. So I couldn't do that and I wouldn't want to do that. But I do appreciate that if it's your livelihood and you can't put your prices up because no one will pay you, then you do end up being unable to look after yourself, put simply, and you'll end up being unwell.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, my wife helps me enormously, but you know, just physically being there and you know, listening to my nonsense. And I
My
have,
partner's the same.
yeah, yeah. Well, not that we should call them nonsense partners or something like that. But
Yeah.
I guess my point is that you know, I don't know where I'm going with this. There come, you know, everyone has a limit. There, you know, I've had good services, bad services. I've actually actively taken a step away from them, so we don't facilitate them as we might have done. We're not as closely engaged with the family for two reasons. One, I think there is a risk, and we have seen this. You can get too close to a family, and I say that with the greatest respect. Again, we're not professionals here, and if you want and need help, you should talk to Grief Chat or you should talk to someone else. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that must be a boundary that needs to be respected by everyone in the profession. And
Yeah.
of course, families don't understand that, and they shouldn't be. You know, you know, they're at their most vulnerable, and I think one has to help guide them pragmatically and sensitively.
So the two, did we do both of the worst ones? Did you have a second worst one?
Oh yeah. Oh, so Liz's one I found really challenging, as you may have noted. But the other one was my father's, where my I saw my father's last breath. It was the 21 minutes past 8 on the 1st of October 2018, and it was a really peaceful thing. And I was there with my mother, and the dogs were on the bed, and my mother said, "Oh," and I said, "I think that's it." So no, that's it. That's it. He's dead. He's dead. And she said, "I'm so glad you're here." And I turned to look at my mother. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the freaking dogs. Um, and I thought that was quite amusing. And then my sister needed the curtains. Um, and so my sister and I took my father to the creme, and he was in a bamboo leaf coffin, which, as he was put onto the catafalque, started to sag slightly. Um, and
Oh
I
no.
I know, and I thought it was amusing, and I'm absolutely sure my father, who was, as my brother and I would say, the funniest man we knew, he would have found that very entertaining.
It is pure comedy, isn't it? You can't
Re
get away from the fact that these
it
incidents are pure comedy. You can't
Yeah,
help
it
it.
was, and then you had the curtains. Finn, you know, and my poor sister, you know, it was so important for her, and I was really pleased to
Oh,
be there for her. But no one else needed that. but it was, yeah, it was great. I think about that. It was,
I find this, I really do find that that's exactly what happens. Like, you'll always have an incident. If you've got someone who's described as a character, euphemism, always something funny happens around the funeral. And everyone says, oh, typical dad or typical mum. That would
well,
happen.
look, we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, with what we do in our work at Sacred Stones, we're doing, we've observed what humans need to do. They need to be together, they need to share. And around life's three principal rituals, union, creation, and death, we need to come together and share. That's all we've done. And as awkward as it may be, as difficult as it may be, there's such strong cohesion in those moments
That's
that,
right. And one of the things that I'm very focused on at the moment is this business about direct cremations and the rise of them. And so I'm trying to fill a gap there where people might want the direct cremation, go with the thing. Um, and then maybe they want to do something later, or they realize the absence of that grieving ritual and they want something, maybe a year later, or maybe COVID happened and they didn't have a chance. So I'm trying to raise awareness around the importance of something if that's something you feel you need, and trying to plug that gap. So, because we can't really stem the tide of that thing happening. And what I love about you is that rather than all these people being stored under beds or in wardrobes, you've got somewhere beautiful and aesthetically pleasing to go with that, because cremations are how we do things in the main. And with the current economic climate, that's also the case. So I love that there's somewhere to go. That's really amazing.
yeah, I mean, factoid here, and shoot me down if this statistic is wrong. In the United Kingdom, I think there's circa 200,000 funeral plans taken out each year, which compared to continental Europe, full disclosure, I think we're European. Continental Europe, that's a
We are, yeah.
relatively low number. Of that 200,000, the majority are electing for direct cremation, DC as we call it. Now,
Really?
yeah, I
Okay.
believe so. Now, so that's really
Hmm.
interesting. Up here, alarm bell is ringing.
Really is.
Down here,
Hmm.
a sense of understanding what's going on here. I think it has its place. It's probably the most disruptive element that the industry's seen in ever, I think. I don't know. And it has its place. It should come with a health warning, because I
Literally.
know, I really do think that. But again, our job is to provide informed choice.
And
And
options. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be like, so I've done lots of ceremonies for people where the direct cremation has been fine, but they just wanted something else. And that's
look,
different.
Look, so it's important to me that whether it's one of our venues or a Tesco car park or a joke or a scent or a color, that triggers something, and you should feel comfortable returning to that moment to deal with that moment of grief. I'm really frustrated when people make reference to grief recovery. I do not want to recover from my grief,
No,
right?
what is that?
Grief is my mechanism to remember and cherish someone, something. It's how we describe it. It's a clumsy, stupid word, but that's what we're given. When someone dies,
Yes.
grief comes in a form of a jacket, a coat that you have to wear. You didn't choose it. It doesn't fit. It's uncomfortable. It will not protect you from the wind. It will not keep you cool in the sun. But I'm absolutely sure that in time, on a sunny day, it'll be a linen jacket. And on a winter's day, it'll be a wool coat, and it will fit. But you have to wear it.
I love
You have no
this.
choice.
I love this. I've not heard this before. No wonder you felt upset by the lack of creative language in that ceremony. I love that. It's so interesting. So, moving on to the next question, what do you regret? Do you have any regrets about ceremonies or life transitions in your own life? I mean, it doesn't have to be a funeral, but that is kind of your area. So,
Whoa,
regret.
that's a deep and dark well you're hovering me over. No, I don't.
It kind of hand in hand with what
Yeah.
you don't regret as well. So you can go for that first
Oh,
if you like.
I don't. I don't have any regrets in the service that we provide or have provided. I certainly have regrets about the way I've developed the business, for sure. Some crass mistakes that fortunately I think I've recognized. It's always, it's obviously such a personal question. I mean, I didn't need, my brother read my father's eulogy and it was fantastic. And I was the one that stood up and applauded. No one else did. My, my
Amazing.
sister read Sea Fever, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
read by Milligan's version because my father would have approved. I must go down to the sea today. So I'm not sure I can really answer that. I think, well, actually ties into this concept of time. Time is a construct, and we're governed by it, whether we like it or not, and we choose to embrace it and we use it to our advantage, and sometimes it works against us. And in this key ritual, we're discussing time. Time has many different phases. Don't know. I find it very difficult to answer that, I'm afraid.
Well, that's really good because I mean, in a way, regret's a bit. Some people just don't have regret at all, and that's brilliant. So ignore that question. So I'm going to come on now to your so what your business really. I really want my podcast to sing for the heroes. I really want you to. I want to champion what you do because what you're doing is fantastic. So I want to hear a little bit more about why, when you were stood on the netball, the side of the netball pitch. Is it a pitch? I forget. Thinking about what to do and this business model, this business idea. What you're doing is very niche and literally it's very unusual. It's not like the most natural thing to suddenly start talking about, oh, let's do this, let's build a thing that's echoing an ancient barrow and put I mean it's very, very creative and literally outside the box, to borrow from you earlier. But what on earth was it that was your connect? What made it go in that direction rather than let's set up a cleaning company or any other thing?
What a good idea. I think it's important to say that I believe the definition of originality is to remember the idea first. There were three principal partners in our business: me, a journeyman; Mark, who's a scientist; and Martin, who is the stonemason. Martin had been commissioned to build a barrow in Wiltshire. The commissioning party was this wonderful man called Tim Dorr. Tim Dorr was a Stonehenge steward, and for shits and gigs in the pub, he thought, wouldn't it be interesting to build a long barrow? So he put in for planning. He put in for
Right.
planning, and he wrestled with Natural England, English Heritage, and a few others. And Martin saw his plans, and Martin, who is a craftsman, went down to see him and said, Tim, this is great, but I need to show you how to do it. And to cut a long story short, Tim said to Martin, bring your team, build it. In that process, Tim's community embraced his idea swiftly. Martin couldn't quite believe this. And he spoke to Mark and me and said, come down, you won't believe this. So on a Dreich October day in 2014, we went down to the West Kennet Long Barrow, which is an original, 5,000 years old or something. And we then went to the Long Barrow at All Cannings, which was built in 2013. And a couple of things happened. The one that Martin had built, that's owned by Tim Dorr, offered a sense of place that provided or gave me an immediate nurturing, had a nurturing impact. I felt secure in there and safe without really thinking about what it was really providing someone. On that day, a couple arrived, elderly couple arrived to choose a niche, and Tim invited me to join the meeting. They were elderly, but they came dressed for a smart Sunday lunch. They walked across muddy fields in their shiny shoes. She had fresh lipstick on. It was a meeting, and they walked in and they chose and they walked out. And I suppose only now or after the event did I really understand, well, what's really going on here. And I took that experience back, and the directors would meet very regularly every week to come up with a business plan, because crudely we know X number of people die each year. The majority choose cremation over burial. That's the fundamental change in attitude since the early 60s. Fine. So do the numbers work? Yes, the numbers work. And it's important that I'm open about that, because we can't operate unless it's a business that washes its face plus, right?
That's right.
So, and then what we did was we shared our own experiences. And the experience I have in mind is my aunt Christine, who died many years ago, and the cremation was at Nausea Cemetery in Chelmsford, Writtle, I think it is, and others. And I just thought, gosh, it's the blue carpet Luther Vandross moment, where the last song is played and you walk through an uncomfortably warm chapel. And for me, it just didn't
Why?
seem.
I know. Why the blue velvet? That's a whole other topic. I might get someone in that's an
So,
expert in blue velvet. I want to
so it,
know.
it was a confluence of those factors that gave us some confidence. And then, as my lawyer would say, the solicitor who helped me draft all the paperwork, and there's a lot of paperwork, he said, I saw him the other day, he said, you took a huge risk, didn't you? And I said, well, I don't think it felt like a huge risk at the time. It was
Okay.
well, it was a bit Kevin Costner-like, Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. And that's what we did. How else do you do it?
Like
I
Fields of
mean,
Elysium.
I guess, yeah. I guess
Yeah.
we could have done it with Lego and, said to someone, well, look, trust me, it's going to be okay. But here it is, using a Danish format. Um, so, so, and then what I had to do
Oh.
was I looked at memorial options for the safekeeping of ashes around the country. Well, how do people do it? And I came across a thing called the Sanctum 2000.
Don't know what
It's
that is.
the Sanctum 2000. It's an above ground ashes vault. It comes in grey, shiny marble. The stone, I suspect, comes from China, somewhere like that. And you have the option for storing ashes in there for a fixed period of time, typically not very long. Sometimes you're allowed to extend the term, so on and so forth. And for some people, they're brilliant, but that's not what I would choose to do. I didn't think that was right. So that's how I started to begin to understand how people memorialized without having a narrative or a vocabulary that I think was appropriate for what we were or what we now do. That's all been learned and still learning. And so that's how it came about. It was some very crude analysis of who we may appeal to. There's no socioeconomic demographic that we target. It doesn't exist because we're all different, and guess what? We're all going to die.
We're all dying. Yeah.
Yeah, the majority of people do still choose cremation over burial, which is another whole conversation. But
Yeah.
I don't believe that's going to change dramatically in England at all.
It isn't. It really isn't. And actually, I really hope you get a chance to listen to Howard talking about it. It was so fascinating because he was talking about the archaeology of death, obviously, because that's his bag. And he was saying that it's been the case that throughout history, there's these waves of different funeral practices. It's not true that you're using the kind of Brexit trick of, oh, in the old days everything was better and we've always done big grand stuff. It's that old origin story nonsense. And he said that you look back over history, there's whole swathes of history where you can't find anything because they were all cremated and you never saw it. So it's not like it's a new idea.
No, it isn't. It really isn't. Remembering the idea first. I
See what you
we're
mean.
we're absolutely not trying to recreate something here. This isn't the Neolithic. I mean, we've spent hours, days
Mm.
working with academics around the world on what we're doing. They're observing what we're doing, and they're
Did
fascinated. And
you?
I think,
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. Kenny Brothy in Glasgow, Mary Louise Sorensen and Chris Evans from Cambridge. I mean, they're leading, world leading archaeologists who are fascinated with what we're doing. And we're at pains to say this is not about the Neolithic. We're echoing. What we do is timeless.
Yeah.
And that sounds, and I'm sorry, that
Yeah.
sounds a bit bumptious, but what humans is what I think we understand something that a human needs at this particular moment in our lives. And for
Yeah.
some
Yes.
people it works, and for others it doesn't. That's all we've done.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
people come to us and say, "Oh, Neolithic, I love stones," well, wonderful. But if we touch on the Neolithic, it was a brutish age, as far as we can tell. We can
Yeah.
observe
Don't want to
it's
go
where
back.
rituals started to become more involved and more complex. We can observe death in context of the politics of religion. We can observe a sense of wanting to take it back. I think that's possibly what we are experiencing the last decade, maybe. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm sorry, but I think,
Well, we were just
yeah, I'll stop.
talking about the origins of it and how it's not
Oh,
Neolithic, and
yeah.
also about the academic context, and that's really,
Oh,
really important because I think having a sort of an historical context for what we do, for what I do, what you do, is to me really vital. I think we need to understand where we're coming from and what we're sitting in. So I love that you're doing that.
yeah. Thank you. I mean, and of course, I don't think we didn't sit down saying, "Well, that's part of the business goal. That's what we must do."
Yeah.
Everything we've done has been completely organic, um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
um, and we when we have a service at one of our barrows, the most intimate was with a lady called Peggy, who was the deceased, and her family brought Peggy dressed in a shroud in their family car. I was on car park duty. I greeted them, and when a body is dressed in a shroud, it's a very physical, visual thing. You can see the shape of the
Mm.
body.
Mm.
It, it's a really big thing. And Peggy arrived, and she was laid in front of the barrow, and people laid flowers on Peggy, and Peggy was taken away. And it was an extraordinary thing. I mean, really done entirely by the family. The funeral director was there in civilian clothes at the back and was wonderfully discreet. There was no Victoriana, and that was the ritual that
Yeah.
I hope served and its purpose. For me as an observer, I think it did. Um, Whereas other cases, you would have the urn. I always think of Eric and Ernie, little urn. Sorry, um, and the urn is placed into the niche. Well, we call that a
Uh-huh.
placement ceremony. I don't know how else to describe it. It's not interment, inurement, or anything else. It's a moment where you're placing someone. And you know, I was sitting with the chaplain from our local hospital before really the barrow was being used, and he said, "Oh, this is a thin place." And I didn't understand what he
Yes.
meant. And a thin place
Right.
is the space in between the now and the after. And
Yeah.
I took that
Liminal
as a great
time.
compliment because he was describing it through his
Yes.
belief system. Because our
Yeah.
our
That's
our
really great.
space is for everyone, irrespective of your beliefs. I mean, it just doesn't matter. Uh, how do you
Well,
if you
that's
choose
right. And
to
I mean,
well, if you choose to share your thoughts, well, we should be flattered that you feel comfortable doing so with us, right? But
yeah.
um,
Oh, I just want to share with you something that I think you're going to understand. So me and Howard had a kind of a debate because I was in the Midlands in Birmingham for 22 years, and for 10 years of that I'm working as a celebrant in the local crems, and they are not the most architecturally beautiful spaces. And so I was saying, I'm not the biggest fan of the crematoria, and the reason is I simply cannot understand how we're in 2023 and we have all this architectural heritage and we have ecclesiastical architecture, which is revered and valued, and we have municipal architecture, which is revered and valued. And our architecture around death is just depressing and devoid of aesthetic value to
Yeah.
me. He was
Yeah.
arguing because obviously because he's Howard, it was really funny. He said he'd done tours of crematoria. It's like crematoria I have known, and he had found some really beautiful modernist ones and different ones. So they exist. But one of the things I love about what you're doing is that you're valuing the aesthetic, which has always been a really important thing in terms of sense of place.
Yeah. And I just, maybe our craftsmen, the stonemasons who built them, were aware of it. I mean, perhaps I just wasn't aware of that in the same sense. I mean, if you talk to um, if you talk to the stonemason when they're building it, it's quite interesting. I'm thinking of Mark actually, for a number of reasons. But Mark, he and I had a conversation years ago about how he said, "Look, you have to understand it's physically demanding, but actually, I'm holding a stone." Now, I'm paraphrasing the conversation. I'm holding a stone, trying to understand how I will shape it to allow it to marry another stone, because the weight and the mass of the stone will dictate how it wants to settle. And he's looking at the pile of stones delivered there on his right, and on his left is his canvas where he's building something. Now, for me, possibly because I'm from a family of creatives, my sister is still a very active artist, Min, and I think we understand, or we have a sense of the integrity in something that's
Yeah.
created physically by hand. Someone has had
Yeah.
to observe for a long period of time and interpret, and so on and so forth. Does that make any sense? And
Yeah,
and I
because what you've ended up with is a sculptural object, a sculptural form.
Yeah,
He's a sculpture in a way.
and I tell you, the most bizarre thing happened. So in Shropshire, um, our site there, we've had, I've lost count. It's over 35 creative souls come to us: musicians, poets, authors, sculptors, um, uh, ceramicists, and a chap called George Stadnick, who's a Lumiere artist based in New York. Stadnick is famed for working with Kubrick, amongst others. He, through the power of Instagram, he reached out to us and said, "This is really cool. I want to make something for you."
Oh, wow.
So he made this mobile, which we suspended from the central chamber at Sultan, which plays with light. And if you look at our Instagram account, you'll see on the winter solstice, when the sun sets and there's no clouds, we have this rainbow effect through the chamber, which, when it happened, was a mind-blowing experience. Nettie Jackson, we commissioned her. She's a stained glass artist to make this glass panel door through which the light would shone, and it creates this rainbow effect. And then his thing was suspended from the ceiling. Um, it's just, we still think it's a bit bonkers. Stone, and the way we've put stone together, has invigorated and inspired people to engage in a different way. And that is why any memorial space must be about life, it must be about expression, and it must encourage people to want to come back and either
Oh, I
rage
love that.
against
I
something,
love that.
or to
Oh, yes. Yes.
sing a song or tell a bad joke. I mean, that's what they must do. It's really important. Compartmentalizing them and ring fencing them with metal stakes and looking at a burial ground, for me, that conjures up death and decay, right? Well, yeah, of course it should. That's what it's there for. Um, but I think it's like it. I don't know. Life is a corkscrew. You're re-experiencing things.
I've heard so many people say, I wrote this book and it just took on its own life. And as soon as it's born, it goes out into the world and it takes on its own life. And I worked in an art gallery for 11 years alongside my celebrancy practice. And I've always considered celebrant work an art form rather than anything else. For me, that's what it's about, a creative art form, like collaboration and devising process. But that's where I come from. That's just kind of me, really, in using myself in my work. But I think there's something about, it's interesting that you said you're surprised by the power of those stones and how they have been so impactful for people. And this is what I mean. I feel like in a secular age, we need mystery and we need to be able to interpret our world and find meaning. And obviously, I mean, you're from an artistic family. That's what art is for. So I think what you're doing, what you have there is an art form.
Well, and we sponsor and nurture culture in many, many different
Yeah.
forms. The fact that
Ah,
we're
yes.
able to host the National Youth Theatre during lockdown, their only live performance, at a time when
Really?
humans have not been suppressed, society's not been suppressed in certainly living memory in that way, and we were able to facilitate expression. And I think that,
We're very
and the
similar in
visit,
our approach to this. And for me, death is about life. I definitely think it's about life. I completely agree with that. But there are people, death professionals, where the fascination is for the macabre and is for death. I'm not that
fine,
interested in death, ironically. I'm really
we are.
interested in life and how life continues and how things take on their own
Oh,
existence in new way.
my pals joke with me, how's the death industry? And I said, well, I don't deal in the death industry. I deal with the living industry because people tell me
That's
lovely
right.
stories.
That's what this is for, because I reached a point where I thought, I have heard 10 years worth of incredible human story, life affirming and just inspiring stuff. You'd think from watching the news, if ever you would do that anymore, without sliding into a catastrophic depression, you would think there is nothing to affirm about human life. And I feel like I have this amazing gift to share with the world of these stories, of your story, of the stories you have to share. So I absolutely agree with you. It is about life.
And it should be part of the national curriculum.
Yeah, that's true. I never thought of that before.
As a parent, an amateur parent, because we never qualify in the eyes of anyone, our job is to nurture, educate, guide, not guide, certainly not lecture, which is the trait of most middle-aged fathers, I suspect.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I
and
see that.
in that, I want my children to have a good sense of humor. I want them to have a good sense of values, a sense of responsibility, and to be caring people. And in that process, they need to value what we've been given, and that's finite. So if you don't really value that, I think you're missing a trick.
Yeah, I do as well. Well, you and I are in that position where we know that day to day. I had someone the other day say, "Oh, I want to buy a boat, but I'm not going to buy it for 2 years." They have plenty of money, this person. Not going to buy it for 2 years because it will be a waste of money. And I hear this all the time: waste of money, waste of money. And I said, but you could be dead. You could be dead by then. And people are not used to us, are they? When you go out into social situations, I find fellow celebrants will say the same thing, that you find yourself saying things that are completely normal parlance in your professional life. Like, well, you might be dead by then, so you might as well buy it now. You just looked at me and I thought, Jess, you have got to be more careful about how you talk.
Yeah. I mean, your friend needs to buy the boat, leave it in the marina, and sit on it and invite people around.
And they were saying, "Oh,
Or,
it depreciates in value." I said,
oh,
"That is the value,
well,
that it's not depreciating if it's investing in your life." But
yeah, but that's you're right. And we need to discourse needs to be gentle, arguments need to be gentle. They need to be had by life by its very nature is tribal. And
yeah, that's right.
I get frustrated when I'm a bit like the white plow horse in Animal Farm, must work harder. I'm not a particularly clever person. I'm poorly read. I'm very poorly educated. But I've done some interesting things. But I do frustrate over not working harder. But my pals say to me, well, why? You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
First of all, I think you might need to go and rewrite that story about yourself because it doesn't sound like it's true. And also they're right. Why work harder? I mean, I'm trying to get into this idea about rest because it's quite countercultural. I think we need to learn how to rest more than we need to learn how to work.
Yeah, my wife is a great reader, and she read a book on sleep, why we sleep, and the author,
Yeah,
um,
Matthew Walker. Yeah.
yeah, he said he wanted sleep to be prescribed by doctors. It's so important. I
Mhm.
mean,
I'm a complete hypocrite. I'm the same as you.
oh yeah, of course we are. We're humans, but
I
I
wish I
mean,
weren't.
you know, the- we're all freaking useless. We're all
Yeah, I
failed
know.
models
We are.
with
We
moments of
are. But
success. I mean, and sometimes that success is measurable, sometimes it isn't. Well, I don't know. I've got a clue, frankly.
I'm with you
Uh,
about the mistakes. I
Sounding
think
alarm.
if you learn anything, you need to learn how to acknowledge your mistakes and live with them, which is really hard. So I've got two more questions. You've kind of answered them, I think. One is, so if you were to give me one line about what you don't want for contemporary British society with regards to life events and specifically for you with regards to death, is it something that we don't want X?
I really should have spent time thinking more about this. Um,
Doing your homework.
yeah, do your homework. What we don't
I've got another
want.
question for you anyway. If you get
Yeah,
stuck,
okay.
I also need to know what makes you hopeful. So you could do the two together if you like.
It's not what we don't want. I don't think we should be afraid to challenge a social norm and take ownership of an experience.
Yeah.
We don't want to be caroled, pigeonholed, and restricted in the way we can choose to express our emotions and the venue in which we choose to express our emotions.
This is a great answer. I love this answer. Something that makes you hopeful.
Oh, just every person I meet at the Barrow didn't know it was here. It's amazing. People, I'll tell you what, and
Yeah.
this has happened, and I can prove it. It's demonstrable. People walking into one of our venues and saying, "It feels like I'm coming home." Quote.
Oh, wow.
A
That's the
humanist,
one.
a humanist celebrant who came to uh, our venue in Shropshire, and I met her in the car park. I tend to do car park duty a lot. She thrust her hand at me and said, "Hello, I'm such and such. I'm a humanist celebrant. Great, really nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. The Barrow's that way." 2 hours later, she came back, and I think it's fair to say that she'd had an emotional experience. She said, "I wasn't expecting that. It was quite something." And I simply smiled and said, "Yep, yep, you,
Yeah, you hear it all
I,
the time.
I'm afraid, humanism is a fascinating movement. It is a political movement, I believe. Been around for 200 years. They're very, yeah, they're part of the Venn diagram of life. You've got one life,
That's
so you
right.
better live it."
I'm
Yeah,
the same as
absolutely.
you. People keep saying to me, "Why aren't you humanist? Why don't you become humanist?" I'm like, because I'm not. I can't become humanist. You don't do that's not it. I'm not what it you just have to be who you are. But most people think humanists are synonymous with celebrants.
I, 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 I'm probably more, I mean, I happen to be a church warden. Think Vicar of
Yeah.
Dibley. I don't really believe,
Yeah.
I really
I was
don't.
in the Anglican church for a long time.
Got the
I was
t-shirt.
gonna be a priest, that was the thing.
There you go.
Yeah,
I
you
can
have to
see.
be really respectful of like, when you yeah, when you've had those experiences with those grassroots Christians, you can't be walking about saying religions are all evil or all religious people are terrible because you've spent your time with really amazing church wardens who might not believe every doctrine, but they get something from it. And people, I think there's a lot of ignorance around religious institutions as well. That's a whole other topic. But yeah, I'm never going to be a humanist because it's just not who I am. But I have huge respect for them. Most of my colleagues are.
This is why I make reference to the Venn diagram. The bit in the middle where all the circles collide, we all share that mysterious place.
Yeah.
And for some people,
Yeah,
it's
and mystery
governed
is so
by,
important.
yeah, I mean, it's a sense of wonderment. I mean, I would feel cheated if
Yeah.
there's nothing else, but I hope there is, because that's in my nature.
Me too. Me too.
I
I hope. That's what I always say to people. I hope. I just hope.
and
Yeah.
and
So
that's
that's amazing.
that's that is I think it's really important, and I think that's what makes us humans.
Oh, I've loved this conversation. Can I ask you to really show off about where you are so that all the people who hear it, who want to go see it, can
Oh,
or see it online, where will they find you, etc.?
sure. So sacredstones.co.uk. Instagram, just put in Sacred Stones Limited. Facebook, that dreaded thing, you will find us there as well. Just put in Sacred Stones.
And
Uh,
have you got any big passion projects at the moment? Or have you got more? Go on.
oh,
Not
well,
Twitter.
yeah, actually,
Others?
there are two. There are two. So we're in planning. We're wrestling with planners in Nottingham for 3 structures on one site, 2 sky barrows and 1 covered barrow. And that is exciting, but it's challenging because we kind of were trying to develop the green belt, and so understandably, and I really get it, the planners are resisting because it's the green belt, and so we need to explain what we're trying to achieve and so on and so forth.
We've got loads more to discuss. That we've reached the end. I'm so excited that you came. I mean, I can't even tell you how excited I am. So that's brilliant. Thank you so
Well,
much
that's
for
very
coming.
sweet. Thank you.